So hi, today is March 17, 2017. We are in the Sudbury Historical Society offices in Town Hall with Kihm Sanders. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your age, where you were born, where you currently live?
Okay, my name is Kihm Sanders. I was born August 8th, 1956 in a suburb of Buffalo called Tonawanda. Moved here to Sudbury around 1960, I think. Lived in a house in South Sudbury on Jarman Road off a horse pond until about 1965, and then moved to North Sudbury, where we kind of like finished our careers here as Sudburyans.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I got a little distracted by that.
That's okay.
Did you tell us your age and...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm 60 years old, and lived here in town off and on my whole life.
All right. And how did you come to live in Sudbury? And you said off and on. If you can just kind of fill in some of those gaps for us.
Yeah, what happened was apparently my father we were living in Buffalo in Tonawanda, and he had two job offers, one at Bell Aircraft and one at Raytheon. I can kind of remember vaguely being very young going out to California while he scoped out the Bell Aircraft job. For reasons that I guess I'm not sure of, he decided on the Raytheon job. So we moved here to Sudbury so he could take that position. And I grew up here, went through the school system, attended a church, which I still attend here in Sudbury. And then, like any teenager, once I got of age where I'd pretty much had enough of my parents and wanted to get out, attended college at UMass Amherst, off and on, came back periodically to work. I had a job over in Natick at the Natick Mall, and then just kind of settled in the area after college and lived all around here, all the way from like Bellingham to Acton to Maynard. Finally moved back home to Sudbury around 1993 when my parents' health was failing, and lost my parents over the next 8 years, one by one. And after that, in all honesty, it was just ridiculous to continue to live here in a giant colonial house all by myself. And the property taxes were pretty daunting, so I sought out to find a smaller house in a neighboring town. And so that led me to Boxborough in a small house, which was close enough to my church that I could still come to service. And so that's how I come to be where I am today.
And do you still attend church in town?
At St. Elizabeth's Episcopal Church, right down there by Nixon School. And
all right, very good. I forgot to mention that if I'm not saying much, it's because I want to kind of record without a bunch of my ohs.
Right, and
so you know.
You know, I meant to ask Sally before we even got involved in this how this was going to take place, and then I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wait and see how they conduct this kind of thing.
So just, if I'm just kind of smiling, I'm listening, I'm listening. And then we can edit it as we go along. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your family. Do you still have family in town? You mentioned that your parents had passed, but I don't know if you have friends and family. Obviously friends, but family who still live in town.
Yeah, really, it was a strange setup, the way my parents met and got married. My mom came from a very large family, and my father was an only child. So all the relatives I had growing up were on mom's side. They're pretty much, all her brothers and sisters are gone, as she is. The cousins that I have are far flung. I don't really know them that well. I have one sibling, a younger brother, who's younger by all of 18 months, and he lives in Plymouth, Mass, and is retired, actually, even though he's younger than me, was more successful in business, so he was able to retire and owns a few properties, one in Maine, one in Pennsylvania, and one here. So really there is no family around here, though when I was growing up, one of my aunt's father lived in Maynard, so we would see them fairly often because they'd come up to visit him. As far as this town goes, in all honesty, Sudbury sort of has a reputation, at least since the 1970s, of being sort of a transit community. A lot of families that come in for the school system end up leaving. I really didn't think there was anybody left here in town that I knew. When I returned to my church in 2001, I was surprised at the fact that there were people here that I still knew and remembered. And obviously with social media now, I've found all kinds of people that are still in the area. So yeah, pretty exciting and pretty unexpected.
So one of the benefits of social media.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so what was your occupation as an adult when you lived in Sudbury?
Well, I feel like Al Bundy. I started out selling shoes at Tom McCann over in the Natick Mall, and would even continue to do that when I was at college, because one of the advantages of working for a giant chain like Tom McCann was they had stores everywhere. So a buddy of mine and myself, who was also a Sudburyan, Nick Davis, who lived over on Surrey Lane, we went to UMass together. We both had worked at Tom McCann in Natick, so we got jobs in Chicopee that we could drive down from Amherst and work a couple nights a week. So I did that for a number of years, and then I actually managed a record store in the late 70s, early 80s. After that business kind of went belly up, it was a small chain that tried to compete with the bigger chains, couldn't do it. I actually switched careers totally and went into manufacturing, which is kind of where I've been all the rest of so from 1981 on, I've been working in various types of manufacturing jobs, and I work in quality. So kind of as a quality control manager in my current position in a company up in Andover, which I almost didn't take the position because of the commute. And the commute's gotten shortened a little bit by moving to Boxborough instead of living in North Sudbury. But that's where I've been now for 12 and a half years.
It's hard to get anywhere from anywhere, right?
You're right, absolutely. and the road systems are just so, overwhelmed now by traffic that it really shows.
Okay. So have you you talked a little bit about your church, so I'm assuming you're pretty active in your church.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to talk about that, and maybe if you've been active in town politics or other types of philanthropy, if you want to share some of those stories.
It's kind of funny because both directions are kind of until recent times, of little interest to me. Politics in general is something that I've never been interested in. Kind of hard to even get involved in politics on a national level, let alone local. The church was one of those situations where my brother and I were dragged kicking and screaming to Episcopal Church every single Sunday when we moved here. And you kind of get force-fed that over a course of years, and it was much different in those days, especially in my particular denomination of churches. You had formal confirmations and all that kind of thing, and it was the old liturgy. And so I was vowed and determined I was going to get out of the church situation as soon as I was old enough, which I did. So I left not only the town at age 18, but the church, and I was gone for 27 years. And then I had a calling to come back, and that's all I can describe. I'll never forget it. It was a month after 9/11, October of 2001. I had a revelation. My father, who was living at home, sort of invalided. He suffered from a variety of maladies, including COPD, so he could still get out and drive the car, which scared me to death when he did. But he was pretty much in need of, regular care. So I'll never forget, after having this experience, going out to tell him, well, just to say hello. I'd come home from work, and he told me that if I were to come home tomorrow and find a car in the driveway, just to park out on the street, because our minister was coming over to give him communion. So that's how I got connected. It was like a sign from the Lord that she just happened to be showing up the day I had this revelation. So I've been back at St. Elizabeth since 2001. Found a lot of old parishioners that I thought were long gone from the area. My Sunday school teacher, still alive at the age of 91, Vernon Clark, lives over here off of Stock Farm Road. Could have knocked me over with a feather when I saw him. And so that's one of the reasons it keeps bringing me back to this town, even though I'm only 20 minutes away. Now I'm in a writer's group, so we meet at Goodnow Library once a month. And that's kind of old friends from high school that I've reconnected with. So those are kind of what has kept me connected to Sudbury. And then, of course, this one lady, Lynn Kreutz, in my writers group, came out on Facebook, our writers page, and talked about this Jim Poole book, Thumbs Out. So, I mean, we've either all read that or are in the process of reading that right now, and that just like knocked me down because I didn't even know half that stuff was in town back in those days. Even though a lot of people from the feedback knew about these mink farms and knew about the flower business here in Sudbury. So that's kind of what keeps me connected.
And it's interesting. That's one of the reasons we're doing this. So it's really great to get the information about what this town was like.
Right.
Things nobody knows about.
Right.
You know, I walk over at Assabet, what is it, Wildlife Sanctuary, and there's a mink trail.
Oh, is there?
It makes sense. It's
you're right.
called the Mink Trail. So, or the Mink Link. So it's one of the trails on the.
Yeah, you know, that's funny. I didn't even put
not
that.
on the side with the building, but the other side.
Okay.
Of the trail. So.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little about this writers group, because I find that really interesting. Is it mainly writers in town, or is it just anybody who's interested in writing?
I'm trying to think how it got started.
And what they write, what you all write about.
Okay, so I think it started because of just Facebook, and we were talking back and forth, and there's a website a page on Facebook called If You Grew Up in Sudbury. And there's a lot of stuff in there that kind of is maybe overplayed because people come and go on that site and you kind of hear the same kind of, the same kind of comments made over and over again as people discover things. But a lot of interesting stuff too. And so one of the things that connected us was this thing about old-time horticulture. And turns out this one guy who lives in Northborough now, who was my neighbor on Cedar Creek Road, his parents ran Sudbury Gardens way back in the 60s and 70s. So he was very familiar with the carnation business and all that. So we started talking about that. Then we started talking about how we all dabbled in writing on the side, kind of here and there. And I've been that kind of person for decades. So we said we ought to get together, and somehow some other people chimed in and showed some interest. So it started out with a core group of about 7 people, and it's kind of dwindled down to about 5 of us right now, all of whom were Sudbury residents at one time. I think, let's see, Jerry lives in Portland, Maine, but he comes down here. Jerry's early to visit his parents who live in Southborough. Robin Boots lives in Swampscott, I think. Steve Dennis in Northborough, Lynn Kreutz is here in town, and I'm in Boxborough. So that's the 5 people in the group. We get together to just kind of show each other things we've been working on, little snippets from whatever. And Lynn got on this kick maybe about 4 or 5 months ago about memoir writing. And maybe like we should dabble in that a little bit. So some of us have kept journals off and on. And some of us have just written about, like a lot of the stuff I write about is sort of cloudy fiction. It's sort of fiction in a certain level of content, but it also contains a lot of fact and a lot of real life-based characters that are in my writing. So that's where we got on this trend. Then she found this Thumbs Out book somehow and started talking to us about it. So I found it on Amazon and bought it and read, very easy book to read, fascinating. Obviously the parts that Jim writes about that are Sudbury based were of the greater interest to me than the later part of the book when he went away to war and that kind of stuff. But just found out things that I didn't know at all about the town. So we're kind of focused on maybe doing a little bit of collective memoir writing. So when we met last Saturday, we all had a chance to sort of read a snippet from what we've been working on to the rest of the group. And it was all just very enlightening, and so I wrote that section that I turned into you guys about a month ago, and I read that for the group.
I haven't seen that.
Okay,
so
yeah, there's chapter 1.
Tell us a little about it.
Yeah, it talks about my coming to Sudbury as like a young kid and us living on Jarman Road, and I remember certain things from that age. There was a kindergarten I used to go to on Dutton Road somewhere. I know you used to go up Pratt's Mill Road, bang a left, and it was on the left-hand side. It looked like a residential house, and I don't know if it's still there anymore, but it was somewhere in between that stretch and like Tanbark Road. So I talked about that. I talked about, walking to school, which was probably a half a mile away, to walk to Horse Pond Road School, which was an elementary school in those days, and how that was sort of just accepted. Nobody thought twice about it back in 1962, even though I was 6 years old. To walk down 3 different streets, cut through a wooded lot to get to a school, and then be trusted to come home, in the afternoons. Talked about that, talked about, remembering being sent home when JFK was shot in 1963. They just kind of grabbed us all and put us in the auditorium and sent us kids home that could walk without telling us what was going on, and stuff like that. Off my neighborhood, there was a street called Bent Road, still there. I think it connects straight through now to Dutton Road or Peakham Road on the other side, but not in the days when I grew up. That was a large forested area with old farms and cellar holes, and we used to go out there and build forts. And the train that was right on the other side of my street was still an active, still had active railroad movement on that in that period. So talked about that, and then kind of ended the chapter when we were moving to the bigger house in North Sudbury, because my grandfather on my dad's side died in 63 or 62, and my grandmother, who had been living with him down in Florida, the intention was for her to move up and live with us, so we need a bigger house. So that's kind of where chapter 1 ends, and I'm working on chapter 2 right now, and that's almost finished, which will carry us from that South Sudbury residence up to North Sudbury, getting kind of settled in there and meeting new people, and I'm not quite sure I think what's going to happen with these memoirs is they're going to cease being chronological after a while, maybe set a framework up to my teenage years, and then start being more like experiential, picking up on themes like vacations maybe, or activities with friends, or that kind of thing. Haven't really thought it out yet. Most of my writing is pretty stream of consciousness, so it's just kind of like get in there, start putting stuff down, go into like free fall mode, and see what comes out.
They have a memoir writing course at Lincoln Sudbury.
I did not know that.
So it's one of the options for students as an English course.
Really?
And they've had some interesting memoir writers. I saw Michael Patrick McDonald, who wrote All Souls.
Oh, all right.
Incredible. It's really good. And Easter Rising, about growing up in Southie. And,
really?
Come and Speak. And so they do have a course there. So you guys might want to connect with them and,
Right.
I don't know how. Just something I thought of. Are you all thinking of these as individual memoirs? Or are you thinking of maybe a collection of stories for an edited book? I'm a bit of a writer, so
it's
thinking about these things.
It's kind of cloudy right now. I could see one of these members driving us toward a collection, and I would certainly embrace that. It's kind of luxurious being able to work with people that have fellow writing interests, because it's always been a solo project for me in the past. Even though, ironically, this Jerry Zarrilli character, who, by the way, is an English professor at some community college in South Portland, Maine. He and I used to draw comics together when we were in 6th grade. So we did a crude radio show in junior high for a brief period. So we've kind of collaborated before, and he's quite a character. He's gifted in many, he even played a song for us when we were down in the the library on Saturdays. So he does a lot of open mic night talent stuff, does a lot of films. So yeah, it could turn into a collaborative effort for sure.
Just in terms of that, do you want to share maybe your fondest memory of living in Sudbury? Like one particular story?
Yeah, there's what I remember the most about, see, it's hard to do. It's really hard to do because it kind of falls into like age segments. I had spoken about this in my chapter that I turned into the Historical Society. There used to be neighborhood parties, outdoor parties in the summer in the Jarman Road, Rolling Lane neighborhood, which basically started with like a potluck supper, where like one family would open up their yard, which in those days there really weren't fences. Kids ran through other people's property with abandon. Nobody thought twice about it. Everybody knew each other, which is a luxury I think is past. So we used to have these summertime parties where like one of the neighbors would set up, you know, a set of grills or whatever, and everybody would bring over food, and we'd just have, you know, activities for the kids and impromptu softball games and kids riding the bikes up and down the street. And it almost seems like something from a bygone age now, because I don't know that that really happens anymore. There was definitely a sense like you were one big extended family.
I think it's different than the organized block parties that some neighborhoods have.
I don't know, because I haven't really been to any of those. It was something that, well, let's put it this way, maybe 3 years ago, somehow or another, I got invited. It was through a mutual friend that I knew on Facebook, and he lived somewhere in southern New Hampshire. He invited me to someone else's house over here on Horse Pond Road. It was a girl who I knew growing up, but not well. Obviously, if you get into like junior high, high school, there's so many kids, but she still owns property on Horse Pond Road, and she owns a good-sized piece of property for the way that neighborhood's deployed. Anyway, she was having a barbecue, and she wanted to get as many former Sudbury people together as possible. So, you know, I'm not really a social person by nature. I'm more of a loner. You know, I've lived alone a long time, and, you know, just kind of like disappear into the woods and, you know, like bonding with nature. And I hemmed and hawed about going to this, and even the guy who invited me, I didn't really know him that well. I just knew him to say hi to in the hallways. So anyway, long story short, I decided to go to this thing out here on Horse Pond Road. Well, wouldn't you know it, I couldn't find the house, right? I had an address, and I could see the houses on either side of where her house should be with numbers on them, but there was like nothing there. Well, I finally discovered there was like this little deliberately hidden driveway that goes up into the woods, and she lived up there. So I walk up there, and there's all these people from my past that I hadn't seen for like 30 years. And that kind of spawned some of these later interactions, meeting people for like these pseudo reunions and that kind of thing. So it's, yeah, it's one of those things I kind of never thought would happen, and didn't think that these people were even around, but it was.
So you're finding the opposite of the old saying that you can never go home?
Absolutely.
You actually can go back home and
absolutely, and
connect with your past.
Right, and also finding out that, you know, people from all this period back, some of them want nothing to do with going back. And some people just lunge at it. So, interesting. You try and, it's very hard after all these years to meet people after, you know, 35 years have gone by or whatever, because you don't know what they've turned into. You don't even know what to expect that they look like or what kind of lives they've been through. And I guess for some people that must be scary. You know, it must be daunting, and they just would rather keep things the way they are and not go back. But I guess I'm adventurous in that sense. It's like always kind of wanting to know what's been going on in the background. So good turn of events the last 7 or 8 years for me as far as reconnecting with this town.
Any other memories you want to share? Like a vivid memory or some other, something that happened that you just think would be really interesting to record?
There's like some mysteries that I've had in my head that no one seemed, it's like a memory I have that nobody else does. And so I know I know one existed. I'm pretty sure the other one was. When we first moved to Sudbury, there was nothing here in town, basically. Route 20 was like a country road, had a few things on it, no supermarkets in town, except for the old McKinnon's liquor store was a combination liquor store supermarket in those days, but it was more like meat. You could go in, buy a 6-pack of beer, a bottle of wine, get a nice steak, get some lobsters or whatever. You drive, and that was, of course, at Concord Road and Route 20 in that little shopping plaza next to Goodnow Library. You headed down that into Sudbury proper. There was a restaurant where Lotus Blossom used to be a Swedish restaurant called the Cafe Stuga. Next door to that was the Sudbury House, which was an old-time, like, American tavern. There was a strip mall next to that with a Maroney's Bakery, even back then, 63, around that period, a drugstore, Colonial Auto Body, a hardware store on the other side where the gas station was. I'm not sure if the gas station was there. I don't think so. And the driving range. There was a golf driving range across from where Union Avenue came out just a little before that. The police station, and then there was a burger joint, like a drive-in kind of place, right where Knobscott Road turns. So at that little V that ended up years later having a couple of self-serve gas stations in it. No one I've talked to can remember this place. I don't think it was there much past maybe 1963 or so, but it was the typical like 50s drive-in like you'd see on Happy Days. It had the cantilevered roof, it had the cars that could pull right up to the spot. You did have to walk up to get food, and they served burgers and shakes and like French fry plates and things like that. That's a memory that seems to only be for me. Nobody else seems to remember it. When I lived in South Sudbury, there was a swimming place that my mother used to take us over in Marlborough, and it was called Airview, but I think it was AIRE-view. There was a sign, and then you drove down a dirt road, and it was virtually like a gravel pit that the owner had dug out and put a beach on, and there was a concession stand and a parking lot, and maybe change houses, and people would come from Sudbury, Marlborough, kind of a neighborhood secret. A lot of people knew about it, didn't want others moving into town to know about it because they kind of wanted a place for themselves. No one seems to remember that. It was somewhere down by the veterinarian place, Dr. McGee. It was on that side of the road, but I can't remember any more than that. So that's one of those memories I would love to run into somebody who knew. And then there was stuff on that strip of road that I'd totally forgotten about till other people mentioned it. For example, if you drove down Route 20 to where Horse Pond Road was, there was a store in that corner where Sudbury Pines is now called Shelley's. And I'm not sure how long that lived, but it was like a red wood frame building with a split rail fence that went all around the parking lot. What part of the parking lot you could still see because it was literally, the lot was just filled with junk. Antiques, old cars, like plowshares, things from the farming area. There was an interior place with old lamps and furniture, and I can remember because my mother used to rail about the place every time she'd drive by. I can't believe a town like this would allow something like that. It's an eyesore, but it was very popular. It was like a sort of bric-a-brac place, kind of thing like that. Now, people mentioned that on If You Could Grow Up in Sudbury. I think it was probably gone by the mid-'60s, because I think the medical center across the street went in around that time, and Sudbury Pines shortly thereafter. So those are the kind of memories That and just kind of like the whole rural aspect of this town. We would have to go to Framingham to grocery shop until they built Star Market. I think Star Market and First National came in the same year. Those two plazas were built, but before that we used to go up to Route 9, which was again a road that was infrequently traveled. You know, you could sit there and count cars for an hour, not like now. So those are the memories I recall the most. The hardware store on the corner of Union Avenue and Route 20 was Hooper's Hardware. I went to school with Eileen Hooper, but I didn't know her well. And I think the family moved away. At some point, that gas station came in, and there was actually a sporting goods store that was there for years. I think it was called West's or something like that, where you could buy camping supplies. So.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to share while we're finishing up here?
When we moved to Sudbury, thinking South Sudbury was relatively rural was nothing compared to moving there. The roads were still, a lot of them, unpaved. If you drive past the high school on Concord Road and you head down that hill where there's a farm field on your right with an island of trees in the middle, that part of Concord Road was restructured sometime in the 60s. You used to go over an old bridge at the bottom of that, and you can still see that bridge if you look through the screen of bushes right before you come out to where Pantry Road connects with Concord. It's still back there, and the old paved strip. Don't know why they changed it, but I can remember going over that bridge with my father when we were on one of these Sunday afternoon excursions in the car like he used to do back in those days. And he was going to take us up to our neighborhood in North Sudbury, which was being constructed. He was going to show us where our house was going to be. And he told us, once you get over this bridge, you're in Indian country, and watch out. You keep your windows rolled up. If anybody lunges at the car, don't open the door. And of course, he was just having fun with us. But that memory resonates. You get up onto 117, and as you drove down from the fire station at the top of Pantry Road, there was a massive complex of chicken coops along the left side of the road, right across from the old Cavuto house, which is that house that's close to the road with it's got like a fieldstone tower that's built onto it. And Cavuto they were an Italian family that had lived there for a long, long time, owned all that property behind there, which the last time I was up there, they're carving that up now into housing developments. So the family must have finally turned the land over. So those were memories of when I first moved to North Sudbury. So I remember that. That was very, very much a playground for us when we would sneak across 117, which we weren't supposed to do, and go play around in the old chicken coops. And they knocked those down sometime in the late 60s because they were going to build a shopping center there, which never happened. And so the land actually just sat there as like a fallow field for 5 or 6 years, and then they started shoehorning houses in. That and belonging to the Greenwood Club. That was like my mother's biggest desire when we were living in South Sudbury. Don't know if it's still true. Of course, Sudbury Swim and Tennis wasn't around then, and I don't think Thoreau was either. I think that Concord came later, but you were on a waiting list if you wanted to get onto Greenwood, sometimes for 8 or 9 years, because they limited the number of people they wanted in the club. And more people wanted in than there was room for. So I can remember when we got accepted to Greenwood, probably around 1967 or 68. That was like the place we'd hang out in the summertime. So those are the memories. That, and there was a store down at the corner of Haynes Road and Pantry. I don't know if anyone's mentioned this before, but it was called the Bowker Store. And you could go down there and get newspapers, eggs, bread, stuff like that. And we would actually walk to that store from North Sudbury, which is a bit of a hike, especially when you're 9 or 10 years old. So it was either going up to the fire station to get candy bars out of vending machines they had, or walking down to Bowker's, because there was literally nothing else up there in North Sudbury. There was I'll take that back, there was a little bar and convenience store where Sierra's restaurant was, called the 117 House, which was something you don't see much nowadays. It was kind of like a regular gentleman's drinking bar on one side and like a little corner store on the other where you could go in and get potato chips and snacks and things like that. So those are what resonate the most with me.
Okay. All right, thank you. That was very good.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was my pleasure.